There are people who kill without hesitation to defend their loved ones, but no one can deny that it's also an act of selfishness. When they do it for strangers, you call them heroes, but when they do it for themselves, you call them selfish. But how did all of this happen? Let's find out in today's episode. They became fast friends and later joined the Genovese crime family. However, their friendship was put to the test in the early 1950s, when they were both indicted for a series of crimes. The two men had different choices to make. They were both ambitious and hardworking, which led them to rise quickly through the ranks. And after years of effort, Vito finally earned the title of Mafia boss. And this is exactly what happened in the story of Vito Genovese, the Mafia boss who killed a police officer in cold blood only to be killed himself because he could unaccept his friend's betrayal. Frank wanted to tell his old friend about the hidden treasure, the loot from the armored car robbery in 1940 that they had planned together. Back then, they managed to escape with $200,000, which is equivalent to about $3.8 million today. After listening to his friend's confession, Vito ordered him killed. His body was never recovered, but the police soon found traces of blood and other evidence that linked Vito to the murder. However, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him, so he got away with murder once again. In the early 1930s, two young men, Vito Genovese and Frank Castellano, met while working in New York Harbor. Their meeting took place in a small cottage on Long Island, where Vito had been staying. But he didn't enjoy his ill-gotten gains for long. During their conversation, Frank revealed where the loot from the armored car robbery had been stashed away. The violence continued for several months, and when it was over, the balance of power had shifted. Upon his arrival, he was greeted by officials from the Italian government who informed him that he was under arrest. This period would come to be known as the Mafia's second peace, and it would last until the 1980s, when the various families would regroup and launch a violent campaign to regain their power. This was just the beginning of a larger trend that would see the Italian-American Mafia greatly weakened during the 1970s. Well, the answer lies in the nature of their relationship. But Vito knew he wouldn't get a fair trial in Italy, so he refused to cooperate and instead went on a hunger strike. Many of his associates feared that the Italian government would crack down on them as well, and some of them even fled to the United States. This betrayal created a rift between the two men, and Vito never forgave Frank for what he did. He pleaded guilty to several counts of murder and was sentenced to life in prison. Vito never forgot about the way Frank had betrayed him, and he took his revenge by having him killed. This act of betrayal enraged Vito, who had always considered Frank to be his best friend. He failed to recognize the depth of Vito's anger, and thought that he could manipulate him into taking the fall. In his mind, Vito had abandoned him and left him to rot in prison for the rest of his life. Instead of showing gratitude, Vito chose to punish Frank for his past betrayal by ordering him killed. Neither man was willing to forgive the other, and it resulted in a violent and unnecessary outcome. Vito was a man who valued loyalty above all else, and Frank had betrayed that trust in a major way. He had chosen to implicate Vito in his own crimes out of self-preservation, and that act alone was unforgivable. We've got lots more Mafia stories coming your way. Frank was already implicated in the crimes, and there was no way to save him from the long prison sentence. If he had been convicted, he would have spent the rest of his life behind bars without any possibility of parole. On the other hand, Vito opted to go to trial, but was ultimately convicted on lesser charges. He might have felt some guilt over leaving Frank to face the music, but he knew that he had to look out for himself. But as it stands, their story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of betrayal and the importance of forgiveness. After 2 weeks, he was transferred to a hospital where he continued his protest. But eventually his body gave out, and he died from complications related to his previous injuries and the hunger strike. He was released after serving 5 years, while Frank spent decades behind bars, never seeing the light of day again. He was known for his brutality and cunning, but despite his fearsome reputation, he remained loyal to his old friend, Frank. Frank felt betrayed by Vito, who he believed should have taken the fall for him. On the other hand, Vito saw no reason to sacrifice himself for someone else. For Frank, it was simple. He survived the attack, but it left him permanently disabled and unable to speak. He tried to get back into the Mafia, but he was too old, and most importantly, no one trusted him. To make matters worse, he was diagnosed with cancer, which meant his days were numbered anyway. Despite being unable to communicate verbally, Vito continued to run his criminal empire, communicating through written notes and hand gestures. This was the point where their relationship began to break down. But everything changed in 1969 when Vito was shot in the head during an attempted murder. Meanwhile, Frank was released from prison on parole, but he was now in his 60s, and his health was deteriorating. He had only one request before he died: to meet with Vito one last time. Vito was still furious with Frank over the betrayal, but agreed to meet with him one last time. It wasn't much of a secret, as Vito had already suspected that Frank had hidden the money somewhere nearby. Frank was brought to a clearing in the woods and shot dead by 2 hitmen. Vito divided the stolen loot among his sons, and it's safe to say that each of them became very rich. A year after Frank's death, Vito decided to travel to Italy to visit his sick mother. They had been tracking him for years and had enough evidence to convict him of several crimes. He refused to eat or drink anything, and his health quickly deteriorated. The news of his death sent shockwaves throughout the Mafia community. However, Vito's death also created a power vacuum within his crime family. A brutal war erupted between the various factions. Many of Vito's allies had been eliminated, and a new boss had emerged. Many of the top bosses were either killed or imprisoned, and the organizations were forced to become smaller and less violent. Why did Vito order Frank to be killed, even though he had done the same for him years ago? When Frank decided to plead guilty to the murder charges, he sacrificed Vito and implicated him in his own crimes. He might have initially thought that Frank would take the fall for him out of loyalty, but he was proven wrong. On the other hand, Frank came to resent Vito for not doing the same for him. But the truth is that Vito simply couldn't risk going to prison for multiple counts of murder. It's true that Vito could have tried to take the fall for Frank, but it wouldn't have made any difference. In the end, Vito chose to protect himself because he had no other choice. Their friendship was destroyed by betrayal and pride, and in the end, neither of them was willing to forgive the other. While it might seem like Vito was the only one at fault, Frank was also responsible for his own demise. Unfortunately, he had misjudged his old friend, and it cost him his life. Even though Frank confessed to Vito where the stolen loot from the armored car robbery was hidden, Vito still viewed him as a traitor. When Frank revealed the location of the money, Vito saw it as a final attempt to manipulate him. In the end, Vito's decision to kill Frank was a tragic consequence of their broken relationship. Maybe if they had been able to let go of their anger and pride, they could have avoided such a tragic fate. Alright folks, that's all for today's episode. Thanks for watching. And if you liked the video, please subscribe.